Art of Medicine session. Now, this session traditionally, it has either artists who are interested in healthcare topics or healthcare practitioners who are interested in artistic topics or want to, collaborate art with their healthcare practice. And last year was interesting because there was featured a movie director who produced documentaries on bloodless medicine and also the hazards of blood transfusion. So it's a very interesting session. So this year we are featuring a real all-time great surgeon slash artist, or artist slash surgeon, obviously bringing art to the surgical field and surgery to the art field. And I will hand over his introduction to actually my co-moderator. That's Sandra Mann. She's an RN from America, United States of America. She's got years of experience in various, bloodless related topics. But one thing is that I'd like to just say she's a remote triage nurse from Mercy Clinics in Mercy Health System, USA. So Sandra, take it away, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shar. There's so many to thank and there's so many to welcome. It's been such a wonderful BMSS conference with so much rich information and insight. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you for that and for welcoming me as well. One of the things we did want to do right now is very precious to us is Dr. Nadey Hakim, who is going to be presenting, and his presentation is going to be on bloodless renal transplant, music, sculpture, and other forms of art. So actually bringing that into bloodless medicine. So I just wanted to take a moment and introduce Dr. Hakim, although we are running a little short of time, and Professor Nadey Hakim has a string of qualifications that are almost too many to mention. You could fill a whole page, but I did want to mention that he has a medical degree, and among many of his qualifications, he's got a PhD, a fellowship of the Royal College of Surgeons of England, a fellowship of the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland, fellowship of the International College of Surgeons, and fellowship of the Royal College of Surgeons of Glasgow. And those are just some of his accomplishments. There are many more here. I was very impressed with, he is a prolific author and sought-after international speaker with over 250 peer-reviewed papers and 24 textbooks. And that's a huge accomplishment, Professor Hakim. So he has been made the Chevalier of the Légion d'Honneur in 2016, and I'm sure I did not pronounce that correctly, but it is a very prestigious title to have and very well deserved, I'm sure. So now we want to present Dr. and Professor Nadey Hakim with his presentation of bloodless renal transplant, music, sculpture, and other forms of art. Dr. Hakim.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me, correct? Excellent. So I will try to catch up with the delays. Don't worry. Being a surgeon, we try to speed up things. So I hope I'll finish on time. Thank you so much for this very generous introduction. My title of the talk is My Journey to Surgery, Thunder and Lightning to Sunshine, because all of us have had ups and downs in our career, and this is what I want to share with you today. And I know I was asked to talk about the bloodlessness of surgery and transplantation. As a surgeon, I believe that every single surgery should be completely bloodless, whether it's transplant, thyroid, the field has to be completely free of blood. And this is how I work in all surgeries. It doesn't apply just to transplant. And when I see a surgeon using just scissors and cutting and bleeding from everywhere, I really think this is not the right way to do it. So I will start by just giving you a bit of an introduction about where I come from initially. Although I was British born, but this is where I grew up initially when I was a kid in this city on the Mediterranean Sea it looks like a very quiet and healthy and nice city. However, when I grew up, this is what has happened, and this is what we can see today in many other parts of the world, whether it's Ukraine or Gaza or Israel. Cities will burn, and when they burn, people who can afford leaving and have the chance to depart will end up leaving. If you see this kind of features from your balcony, and this is what happened to me as a kid. I ended up going the first stop to Paris. Being British, we were welcomed there. And at that time, I was just finishing schooling, and beautiful Paris welcomed us all. And I entered the medical school in Paris. The school I went to was called the René Descartes University, which is named after the philosopher Descartes, which I'm sure you all heard of. After completing my medical school, I was honored to be awarded the medal of a laureate of the Faculty of Medicine in 1984. And this was the medal I was given, which depicts Hippocrates. And I'm showing next to that a sculpture which I was offered by my father when I was still a kid, and because he knew I always wanted to be a doctor. But you see the resemblance of that sculpture with the medal which I was awarded for my hard work at medical school. Following this, I went to Guy's Hospital in London, which is part of King's College Hospital. And as a matter of fact, my daughter now is 25, is a medical student at King's, and Guy's. So it is an incredible coincidence. So I went to medical school in Paris, but then I finished my training in surgery at Guy's. And at that time, even at that time, this picture dates from 1982, there were still strikes in London. And you can see here with some foreign medical students next to me. And I'm showing this picture because it is important to note that on that picture, I have 2 German medical students and 2 American medical students. And the reason I'm mentioning this, because those 4 medical students have shaped my future. And I tell you why, because the first one shown here ended up being in Chicago, and I met him in Chicago. And the other 2, one was from the Mayo Clinic as a medical student, and the other one from Hopkins. So these were the first times I've heard those names of hospitals. And I mention this because this is what happens later, and you'll see that for a fact. Thanks to that guy from Hopkins, I contacted Johns Hopkins as a student at the time. I said, I want to do a fellowship at Hopkins. So I was accepted, and I did a pediatric surgical fellowship at Hopkins. The Mayo Clinic came after, and again, thanks to that American medical student, I contacted the Mayo Clinic and I ended up doing a fellowship in GI surgery at the Mayo Clinic. And this is the gentleman you saw in the picture before. Now, this is the medical student who was at Guy's, but by this time he was already a fellow in orthopedic surgery in Chicago. So I went to visit him when I was at the Mayo Clinic, and we were walking in Chicago along the Lakeshore Drive. And at that time, we talk about 1987 now, there was no mobile phone, no social media, nothing. So we had no idea how to contact anything. And I was passing by this building, and I wanted to see this plaque here, which says International College of Surgeons. I knocked on this door, went in, I said, you know, I'm a future surgeon or surgeon training. I'd like to be associated with this college. And indeed, I ended up becoming a fellow of the college. But not only a fellow of the college, 20 years later, I became the president of this college. Would you believe it? It is truly an incredible story. Thanks to my stay at Mayo, which is in Minnesota, I ended up going to do a fellowship in transplantation at the University of Minnesota. This is where I trained to do pancreas transplant. And coming back to London, I performed the first ever pancreas transplant in London. And thanks to this, I was asked by Oxford University Press to write a book, or to edit, more precisely, a book on pancreas and islet transplantation. And my co-editors were Rob Strata, an American transplant surgeon, and Derek Gray, who is now gone, from Oxford. This was one of the books I've edited, and then it was so popular that 10 years later, I did a second edition, but this time we added stem cells. And not only this, I added a few more editors. The last one here, Alan Coleman, is the guy who's done the first ever Dolly the sheep. And I got him as a co-editor to tell you how significant that book has become. And it was forwarded by Gabby Danovich, who is a nephrologist from UCLA. We spend our time doing bloodless surgery in theaters, and this is what I was doing here, kidney transplant at St. Mary's. St. Mary's that's where Alexander Fleming worked, and this is actually exactly where penicillin was discovered. Along this first floor was the offices of Alexander Fleming. He discovered the penicillinum at that time on that window, having left a Petri dish on the balcony. So this is again historic because that's where my office was, on the second floor of that building. A book on transplantation edited by myself for Imperial College, again, was a very satisfactory book. I entitled it Introduction to Organ Transplantation. And funny enough, I come from a musical family. My brother is an organist in Paris. And coincidentally, he's written a book called Introduction to Organ Improvisation. So it is incredible that I ended up having an almost similar title of my book. And this is a second edition of the same book, because when a book is popular and sells, the publishers want to have a second edition. It's quite a good sign. As is another book on dialysis, and this again from Imperial College. My co-editor here is Jacob Akko, who is from Nigeria. And I've asked Roy Khan to do the painting. And at that time, Sir Roy, who was a friend of mine, offered to do a painting of depicting the AV fistula. Back to theaters, again for bloodless surgery, and another book, Transplantation Surgery, this time with Gabby Danovich, a gentleman from UCLA. This book was very interesting because it was published by Springer Verlag, and the introduction was written by a Nobel Prize winner called Jean Dosset. Now, Jean Dosset is the gentleman who got a Nobel Prize for discovering HLA, which we use now on a daily basis, but he was the Nobel Prize, French Nobel Prize, who got the HLA discovered. And this is a second edition from actually last year with a few more editors. One is Mehmet Haberal from Turkey and Daniel Malouf from the US. And this is the part of the introduction forward by Jean Dosset, the Nobel Prize, who's written it actually initially in French, translated, and this is still in the second edition of the book. So this is truly an achievement. I was very proud to have a Nobel Prize winner writing a foreword for my book. Another textbook on pancreas transplantation, this time with yet another French co-editor, Michel Dubernard. And I mention him because he is the gentleman who eventually led the first arm transplant performed in the world, and I was part of that group. This is Jean-Michel Dubernard, who sadly died last year. of a heart attack while he was in Turkey at the airport, but very sad. But he has made history by facilitating the first ever arm transplant. This is me doing a pancreas transplant, and this is what I've started at St. Mary's many years ago in 1995. All these patients have had a kidney transplant. All were cured of their diabetes. It is an incredible sensation to have all those people, and now many more people in the world have had that pancreas transplant. And I mentioned Jean-Michel Dubernat. Indeed, he is the gentleman I worked with to do the first ever hand transplant, and I was part of the team representing Britain at that time in 1998. And this is some pictures of the first ever arm transplant in the world. This is a cadaveric donor, where you see here in 1998, the first ever arm transplant in the world. And this is the gentleman who had it done, Clint Hallam, who was from New Zealand. And you can see here, I was visiting him at the hospital in Paris, in Lyon, sorry, where it was done. And he came to visit me in London with his functioning arm. Having said that, 2.5 years later, I had to amputate the arm in London because he stopped taking his medications, because transplantation without immunosuppression is a failure by definition. And many years later, this is 2021, he died, but having been the pioneer in arm transplantation in the world. You have to admit and agree that this is a big, big thing to do, to accept to be the first ever guinea pig, I would say, to have an arm transplant. This is the second patient we've done. This time it's a double arm transplant, 2 arm transplants performed. And this time it is a Frenchman who had it done. And this gentleman still has his arms after 25 years. So it is quite an impressive achievement to have this gentleman. And we end up going actually to Rome together to visit John Paul II, because he was a fervent Catholic and wanted to visit the Pope. And this is me and him and Jean-Michel Dubernat when he came to visit us in London. We ended up writing a book on composite tissue allograft, which is the same as arm transplantation, and my co-editors were Jean-Michel Dubernat and Earl Owen, who is the pioneer in microscopic surgery. As the introduction mentioned, I have a hobby. I do sculpting, and this is when I was doing the sculpture. I hope you recognize it already, the sculpture of Her Majesty the Queen, 20 years ago now. And it ended up, at that time, she was younger, obviously, and this is a sculpture which is at Buckingham Palace. I offered it to Her Majesty at that time. And many years later, just before she died, I ended up doing another sculpture of Her Majesty. But this is 2008, where I got a letter from Buckingham Palace thanking me and saying that the bust will be part of the Royal Collection Trust at Buckingham Palace. And this is more recently, just 2-3 months before she died. And as you can see, an older lady, still very elegant, but this is now at the Commonwealth headquarters in London, exhibited permanently. I'm just showing you a short video of how it looks like so that you have an idea. This is a bronze sculpture of Her Majesty. I mentioned to you the visit to Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, and eventually, as I mentioned, I became 2004 the president of the college. And these are my predecessors. You can see the difference in age. I was hardly 44 at that time, but my predecessors were all in their 70s, having been president. So I was very proud to represent the UK as a president of the college. So this is my medal, of which I was very proud. And this is the same site where I took the first picture in front of the college with the British flag and the US flag being flown at the college. And I was representing the college at the WHO, and back to theaters again to do bloodless surgery and more books. This is a book called Surgical Complications, where I chose to put a painting which depicts the doctor repulsing death. You can see that lady dying because she's being pulled down by the skeleton, but the doctor repulsing the skeleton to salvage the life of this patient. Now, a patient of mine, American patient of mine, said, you know, this painting depicts someone else, so I'm going to order another painting with your face on. And this is what he offered me with the same picture. More books again in hemostasis. This is obviously a book about bloodless surgery, because that's what we are here for. And you end up operating with no blood required in theaters. And when I do my transplant, to be honest, I can't remember the last time I required to give blood to the patient. This is the Hammersmith Hospital where the transplant unit is. This is where 200 plus transplants are performed on a yearly basis. A sculpture of mine is at the entrance of the hospital. I fashioned this sculpture, but in exchange for £3 million donated by the gentleman. So I told him, can you give us some money for research? He said, yes. I said, I will do your sculpture and it will be exhibited in front of the entrance of the hospital. And we named the unit after him. It's called the Nadey Hakim unit. He's now Sir Nadey Hakim in London. And this is the £3 million, just thanks to a question I've asked and a sculpture I've done. The Royal Society of Medicine, I was the vice president until probably 4 or 5 years ago now or more. And this is a place I'm very proud of. I did another copy of the same sculpture of Mr. Hakim and got £750,000 for the second sculpture for the Royal Society of Medicine. And this is the Chicago College of Surgeons, where I was president. As you can see, these are member of council at the college. And again, another copy of the same sculpture, $500,000. So this gentleman has been very, very generous and has donated almost £5 million for medical activities, just thanks to a sculpture like this one. And this is the chief executive of the college, Mr. Max Dowden. And eventually, people ask me, can we do a painting of yourself doing surgery? And this is myself with the college members performing a nephrectomy. And this painting was at the National Portrait Gallery, and it won that prize in 2010. And even the BMJ chose it as the picture of the week on that year, 2010. So again, I managed to highlight that picture, not only in the museum, but again in the newspapers, where an article in The Guardian says surgeon inspired by Rembrandt in that particular picture. A book on bariatric surgery, which I do, which got the BMA highly commended book in 2012. And talking about sculptures, this is David Cameron, which again I have offered to the Conservative Party. They auctioned it at the dinner and they got £90,000, 90, and it is currently exhibited permanently at the Carlton Club. Should you want to visit the club, you will see it there. And I'm very proud that one of my sculptures has benefited in that way the Conservative Party. Now, as I said, sunshines are not always there, and this is why all of us will get eventually to have a problem. And indeed, almost 10 years ago now, they claimed that I delayed an NHS operation to treat a private patient, which is certainly not the case, but some jealousy will happen. And this is why, even in the papers, front page of the Evening Standard, World Transplant Expert axed by the trust for gross misconduct. So I sued them, and the judge thought I was right, and I was reinstated after a year and a half. Of course, it took time, but again, I got my revenge because I had done nothing wrong on that day. While I was off the hospital, but still doing private work, that allowed me to do more sculpting. So I went to Florence, and I always wanted to do the head of David Michelangelo. And this is what I've done while I was in Florence. And that sculpture is now at the museum in Tuscany, in the Museum of Pietro della Francesca, as you can see here. It is in the gardens of the museum, and this will be there forever and ever. This is a team from the UK who visited the museum with me and saw that sculpture. The French, and I owe the French a lot, honored me by giving me La Légion d'honneur. And this is the highest order you can get. And I am very proud of this honor. It is equivalent to the knighthood from the UK, although I'm not a French citizen, but I was honored by the French and given that Légion d'honneur, which I'm very proud of. And this is, at that time, Jeremy Hunt, who was health secretary, who came to the ceremony at the French embassy with the French ambassador, who awarded me the Légion d'honneur medal. And because of that, eventually I ended up doing the sculpture of Macron. And this is a very nice message he sent me, pour Nadey Hakim, en hommage cordial, cordial homage by Emmanuel Macron. And this is the same copy, which is now permanently exhibited at the French embassy in London, in addition to the Elysee Palace. Sculpting again, the Pope, John Paul, Pope Francis. Recently, again, I offered him his sculpture. And you can see from his eyes, he was very pleased with it. And this was in 2018 in the Vatican. And he was blessing that sculpture, which is now at the Museum of the Vatican. And this is how he looked like almost 10 years ago now, or less. Obviously, he got older recently. And I didn't stop that. I ended up going even to North Korea. People say, why North Korea? He's a monster. Yes, of course. But this is not why I did it. I did it, it's art. It's art. And thanks to that sculpture, I ended up visiting North Korea, invited by the government of North Korea to give lectures on medicine and transplantation. And this is what was highlighted in the papers in London. And not only North Korea liked it, but South Korea was jealous. So they contacted me. They said, oh, you've done North Korea, so you should do Moon, the South Korean president. And this is why I think you should open to all venues and not be restricted to only one. This sculpture of Boris, which is at the Downing Street, which I offered to him. And I want to share with you, hopefully it will work. This is when I offered it to him. So he had no idea he was going to be offered that sculpture.
Oh my goodness, that's extraordinary. It's far too flattering. That is far. Look at that. What do you think? Look at that. is this? 5 minutes to see you. I think it's part of that.
I think you should stand up.
Stand next to
And
me.
then yes.
I think it's part of that.
So, and we have now
The picture didn't come with it.
He's very generous. He loved it so much. He said that this message so great. This was, I like you so much. I was inspired. And then so you mentioned music on music and literature. So
That's really nice.
you don't mind because I was asked to. I will not bore you more than this with this, but this is to give you an idea about what music is all about. And this is the sculpture of the first ever doctor in the UK who died of COVID-19. He was my registrar. And after his death, because I liked him so much, I fashioned his sculpture and offered it to his kids, well, doctors, to his wife. So this is reminding me, at that time he was 64. And I really liked him so much. He came originally from Sudan, but he died sadly of COVID. And someone asked me to remind us what COVID has done, and I thought of the sculpture of a skull with the virus on top of it. It summarizes what the virus has done. The virus has killed so many, and we end up skeletons because of that, sadly, the virus. And this was used as a picture in one of the Portuguese journals of surgery by the editor. Now, I would like to share with you the sculpture of unfortunately, it doesn't seem to show. But that was the sculpture of President Modi, or Prime Minister. Here is with the king at the dinner, because at that time I was the vice president of the British Red Cross, and he's the patron, so he invited us to dinner at Clarence House. And this is the sad what happens, unfortunately, in Lebanon. And this is music I've played with some pictures to show you what happened to Lebanon. As you remember, there was a bomb which happened, which blew up. And see, this is what the destruction before and after. watch the bomb now. See, very sad. So the hospital where I work now is the Cleveland Clinic, London, which is a satellite hospital of the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio. I'm very, very proud of that. I'm a professor of surgery there. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, I want to complete my talk by mentioning Charles Mayo, who said, if we excel in anything, it's in our capacity for translating idealism into action. And lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Death comes to us all, but great achievements build a monument which shall endure until the sun grows cold. And I finished with Khalil Gibran's statement, if I accept the sunshine and warmth, then I must also accept the thunder and lightning. Thank you.